Lady Ballers is a 2023 film written and directed by Jeremy Boring and produced by Ben Shapiro's media company, The Daily Wire. Let's talk about it. Okay, so to set the scene and properly orient the rest of my analysis, I am going to briefly talk about the plot. Now, judging the film by this metric, it is decidedly not good. I imagine most people probably aren't surprised to hear that though, so to streamline things, I'm just going to explore the film's premise and then also the role of conflict in adding substance to an otherwise very thin narrative. So for those who don't know, Lady Ballers is about a group of former basketball players who decide to rejuvenate their career, despite being well past their prime, by competing in the women's sports category. The film starts by showing the head coach, Roy Gibson, coaching his team, specifically giving them a motivating speech that really fires them up.
Winners are just losers who win! Winners!
Winners are just losers who win. I don't know what that means, but it's funny to me. Now, at this point, I thought the film was going to be both subversively comedic and also efficient by contrasting this inspiring speech by showing the team getting absolutely destroyed in the match. Yeah, see, like, again, they did really well. It's like saying, hey, you are the best coach ever. So it's like, I don't know why you would do that. Like, you're setting him up as a really good coach, which would seem the opposite to what you want to do if you're trying to make the comedic crux of the film the fact that this really bad basketball team basically just decides to identify as women, and then they, obviously go on to win the championship because they're playing against women. And then it cuts forward 15 years to show Gibson coaching a different team who are younger and less interested before deciding to abandon that team entirely, and they never show up for the rest of the film, so he can go pursue the team he used to coach 15 years ago. Why? Not sure. The whole film is just needlessly convoluted in terms of getting us to the point of Gibson coaching a mediocre team. The film is so inefficient in getting to the whole trans sports thing that by the time it actually gets to the point of Gibson explaining that that's his plan, I had kind of forgotten that's what the film was supposed to be about.
You haven't told them.
Told us what?
I actually kind of forgot that there was a whole trans thing going on. For a minute, I just completely forgotten that the whole point of the film was supposed to be that they were going to pretend to be women. The actual way they introduce the whole trans sports thing is that Gibson shows up to his old work, which has now been turned into a drag bar where one of his former players, Alex, just happens to be working.
Coach?
Then Gibson mentions that to make a bit of money, they could show up to this sporting competition that's happening and Alex could compete as a man.
The money could be nice.
Damn right it would be.
Now, I know what you're thinking. Wouldn't it make more sense to just have the fact that Alex is already in drag, plus the fact this guy is a sports coach, you just put those two things together and he decides to have the guy compete as a woman? But no, instead, they show up to the competition planning for Alex to compete as a man, but for some reason, despite being off the clock, he's still wearing his drag stuff. And he still doesn't come up with the idea of entering him as a woman. They then go to the organizer, who explains that the men's category is full, and they still don't come up with the idea of entering him as a woman. The only point where they come up with that idea is when one of the people involved in organizing and signing people up for the competition assumes Alex is a trans woman.
Oh my crap, you're a trans woman.
And then they're like, okay, yeah, I guess we'll roll this. Which seems like a circuitous route to get to the point, considering that, by the way, prior to this, there had already been a separate conversation that Gibson had had with his daughter about the whole trans thing, so the trans thing should have been, fresh on his mind anyway. It almost feels like the narrative is telling the characters, do the trans sports thing, do the trans sports thing, and the characters are just completely oblivious until the narrative has to write in a character to literally be like, oh, you're trans, right? At this sports thing, I guess you're a trans sports person, and then the character's just like, okay, I guess. Also, it is a bit weird that the guy shows up to the sports competition in drag when it's been established that he's only working at a drag bar for his work, so why is he in drag when he's off the clock? Well, the movie sort of answers that because towards the end of the film, Alex reveals that he actually has come to think of himself as authentically trans.
I am a woman.
I mean,
So now they're introducing the fact that this guy is like not faking it and is actually, you know, a trans woman. So maybe the fact that he shows up in drag already off the clock is supposed to be setting that up, or maybe it's poor writing. There is also another moment where it's implied that the characters are getting a little bit too comfortable pretending to be women, although when that happens initially, it's entirely played off as a joke. I actually do think including a sincerely trans-identified character is a smart move, because otherwise the film could be seen as implying that literally the entire trans sports debate is about self-aware grifters who know they're lying and aren't actually even sincere in claiming to be trans, just going into women's sporting competitions in order to cheat. And the implication of that could be that if somebody is sincerely trans, well, would that mean it's okay? And of course the answer should be no. And people will argue that actually it's not a thing where men just pretend to be women so they can succeed in sports. And those people are probably right, but that doesn't mean that biological males competing in women's sports is okay. And in including a trans-identifying character, the movie doesn't present trans identity in a sinister or cruel way.
this is who I am. Proud of myself for the first time.
He basically just says that he feels comfortable being perceived and understood as a woman, and this is something that he has not experienced up until this point, which seems like it's probably quite a sincere representation of an authentic trans identity. And the film does touch on the appropriate response to somebody who does have a trans identity, basically saying that these feelings are real and perhaps understandable, but that these feelings don't make you a woman.
You're confused. I get that. We all get confused sometime. And if you need help, buddy, I'm going to help you get it. But you gotta believe me when I tell you this. You are not a woman.
However, the film doesn't really spend much time on this issue. Like, it's literally just one conversation. Alex walks up to Coach Gibson and says, hey, you know, I think I might actually be trans. Gibson basically says, well, maybe you've got those feelings, but that doesn't actually make you a woman. And then it's kind of cut off comedically with a nutshot.
How can you be so sure I'm not a woman?
And that's basically the problem with a lot of the conflict in this film. Obviously, films need conflict to be entertaining, but rather than developing a consistent through line of conflicting priorities and personalities, in this film, they just throw a whole load of random, underdeveloped stuff into the mix, and I'm like, yep, that's it, conflict, job done. Like, the first major conflict they introduce is this one character, Dave, begins to seem kind of genuinely, bothered by what they're doing and how unfair it is. But rather than this being something that's kind of in the background and develops throughout the movie, he then immediately voices his concerns.
I don't know, Coach. It's just some of those girls we're out there beating, they've worked their entire lives for this opportunity.
And then within that very scene, he does a complete 180, and any concerns that he had about what they were doing are never brought up again.
I'm with her.
I don't really understand some of like the character arc stuff. Like, you have this character who's supposed to like feel bad about it, and you think that's going to be like something under the surface that like slowly results in like confrontation, but instead he just says it right away that he doesn't like it, and then he just completely changes his mind when he gets the sponsorship.
I just got sponsored by Maybelline.
Then at one point they just randomly become bad at sports. Like, for no real reason, they just have an off day, and that's the conflict. Okay, so now the conflict is completely out of nowhere. They're suddenly not very good at sport. Two characters I haven't mentioned yet because they're not really relevant get a woman pregnant, and that's treated with some melodrama. Gibson's daughter approaches him at some point and says that she wants to be a boy because boys are better at stuff.
I want to be a boy.
What?
Okay, so now they've introduced like another element, which is now his daughter wants to be a boy. So that's like another kind of conflict, but I don't know, just like have a conflict and stick to it. Again, this is quite a serious issue, the idea of somebody's child saying this to them. And this could have been something that was slowly developed in the background, and then Gibson starts to realize the real harm of what he is doing as he sees it affect his own daughter. But instead, it is something that is literally introduced in a scene and then resolved within that scene. This is literally the entire movie. Every scene is just filler where a random conflict is introduced, and then by the beginning of the next scene, it's been dismissed. And this goes right up until the very end when there's this conflict because now they're facing another team of biological males who are identifying as women, which again is not something set up. There's no point to it. It doesn't go anywhere. The only real enduring conflict centers around a reporter character who I don't really understand the point of. I feel like at some point someone was like, hey, maybe we should have another character in there with their own set of motivations. And everyone was like, yeah, that's a great idea. And they got really excited. So excited that they forgot to actually then write the motivations for that character. So yeah, lots of pointless characters in this movie, including Gibson's ex-wife's new boyfriend, Matt Walsh.
I was thinking, why don't the three of us get together this weekend, have a little picnic?
Oh, yeah?
What happened to Matt Walsh? What the fuck was that? What? The closest the film comes to a central conflict is around Gibson's desire to win. I say this because it is something that is at least reinforced 3 times in the beginning, middle, and end of the movie as a character conflict. I've already shown the clip at the beginning of the movie where he says, "Winners are just losers who win." And then in the middle of the film, he has an argument with his wife where she accuses him of being obsessed with winning.
I never cared if you won or lost. I just wanted you to be happy.
And then the film ends with him rejecting the idea of doing whatever it takes to win.
Winners are just losers who do what's right. Come on now, hustle.
Winners are just losers to do what's right. I like that. I like it. It's good. Because obviously there's a contrast. It was winners are just losers who win, but now it's saying it's not about winning, it's about doing what's morally good. Good ending. Hello. This is pretty good as a basic wants versus needs character arc, and credit to them for spanning it across the entire film, but outside of these 3 scenes, this character conflict really isn't mentioned at all, and it's decidedly drowned out by all of the other character conflicts which just have no point at all and are completely underdeveloped. Now, you might ask, why have I spent any time at all talking about the plot of this movie? And to that, I would say, because it's a movie. It's not a documentary or a video essay on trans sports. It's supposed to be telling a story, so I think the quality of that story matters. See, I actually agree with Ben Shapiro's logic that seems to be underpinning his effort to make films with the Daily Wire. It's pretty clear that he's thinking that for his ideas to proliferate, he needs his platform to have more of a presence in the mainstream beyond just people who like watching nasally, fast-talking people debate high school students. This is something very similar to what I've said about the gender-critical movement.
My former lover, the TERF.
Oh, TERF. Wow. If the gender-critical movement is going to succeed, it's not going to be through people choosing to engage with gender-critical content, but rather through people being exposed to gender-critical ideas by gender-critical ideas bleeding into the mainstream culture. This is why J.K. Rowling coming out as gender-critical was so huge, not because she's had some fantastic gender-critical arguments that she's contributed, but because she is incredibly ensconced within the mainstream due to the success of the Wizarding World franchise. It forced people who love Harry Potter to take gender-critical ideas seriously because they were being advocated for by somebody who they respected. This is why I've always said that the commercial, critical, and cultural failure of the Fantastic Beasts movies has actually been a really serious knock to the gender-critical movement, because it allows people to much more easily dismiss J.K. Rowling as an irrelevant bigot, since her most recent contributions to mainstream pop culture have been such a relative drop-off. I'll link to a video I've already made addressing this point, but for now I'll repeat the basic point I make there, which is, if you are into YouTube, then one of the things I think you can really do to benefit the gender-critical movement is do something other than producing gender-critical content, whether it's travel vlogs, makeup vlogs, music, book reviews, media reviews. And on the subject of media reviews, I have a channel now where I do media reviews, and that has had some success. My first video that I uploaded to that channel got 30,000 views. So I like to imagine that maybe that channel could someday have a reach large enough that there will be people who will be introduced to gender critical ideas by saying, oh, I like this guy's film reviews. I like seeing him talk about media. Oh, and what's that? He also talks about the trans issue. And by seeing that and by being introduced to that, that will help gender critical ideas proliferate. And obviously, it's appropriate that I'm doing a media review right now as I'm mentioning that. And I will, of course, say that if you are somebody who cares about the gender critical movement, and if you're somebody who likes my content in general, then I would very much appreciate it if you went over to that channel and subscribed. And especially seeing as I've got a pretty big video coming out on that channel quite soon. So that would be very appreciated. Thank you. So that bit of self-promo does have a point, which is to reinforce the fact that I agree with Ben Shapiro that making stuff that is going to be accepted by the mainstream is a very good way to ensure that your ideas have broader reach. But if you're going to do that with movies, the movies have to be good. That's why it's significant that the plot of this film decidedly flops. People need a reason to watch this film other than an already established interest in the topic it's addressing. Otherwise, what's even the point in making this movie to introduce people to the topic? We need a reason to get invested in these characters and the journey they go on. Yes, it's a comedy film, but most comedies still have a functional plot. Daddy's Home 2, to pick a random example, is very clearly about Dusty and Brad struggling to maintain their relationship as co-dads, even as Dusty's dad enters the picture as an antagonizing force.
The only person who can ruin your Christmas is looking back at you from that mirror. All I see is you, Brad.
That's the conflict that keeps the audience invested in how the film progresses. Now, some films do eschew a plot for comedic purposes. Often these will be absurdist films where on a meta level not having a functional plot is part of the comedy. However, this is a risky strategy as an unfunny comedy can get by if it has an okay plot. There have been comedies I've watched that I haven't found funny, but at least the meager plot has left me partially invested in the film overall. If a comedy film doesn't have a good plot to fall back on, then it really needs to bring the good quality jokes. Let's talk about that. A while ago, I made a tweet saying, does anybody find that trans identity is so obviously wrong that it's hard to find comedy about it particularly funny? It feels like low-hanging fruit, like making fun of flat earthers. This was in response to the Ricky Gervais stand-up special where he was basically just explaining what trans activists believe. And that's kind of the issue. There aren't that many jokes you can make about women with penises that are any more funny than just the reality that that's what some people believe in. And that was my concern going into this film, that it could be very one note and never really ascend beyond just pointing out, hey, this is a thing that can happen now. I'm actually a representative of a dying belief. There's not a lot of people who believe this anymore, but I think that comedy should be funny. It seems like a lot of people now think that comedy is when somebody stands up in front of an audience or in a TikTok or on a tweet and they say something on a current culture war issue that you agree with. And if you agree with it, that's funny. If you disagree with it, it's not funny. And that's how comedy works now. Now, I personally don't really care if I agree with somebody. I just want them to be funny. I think a lot of conservatives tell on themselves when it comes to people like Bill Burr. Because Bill Burr, he's a very irreverent, offensive person, and sometimes he will make fun of the ridiculous moralism that you see from the progressive left. And because he's done that a fair few times, there are lots of conservatives who say, oh, I love Bill Burr, he's really funny, I really appreciate his comedy. But Bill Burr, like me, when it comes to comedy, doesn't care about agreeing with a particular side of the political aisle. He just wants to point out stupid things and make fun of those things. So when COVID-19 happened, and you had a bunch of men acting as if it was some big representation and mark of their manliness that they couldn't stand to wear a tiny bit of cloth on their face, Bill Burr made fun of the ridiculousness of that situation.
Oh, God, you're so tough with your fucking open nose and throat. Gee, Joe, and your 5 o'clock shadow. This is a man right here. A man doesn't wear a mask.
And loads of conservatives were like, oh man, Bill Burr, he's sold out, man. He's changed, dude. Because he used to be funny, but now he's not funny anymore. And it's like, the fact you're saying that shows you never understood what made Bill Burr funny in the first place. You just liked it that he agreed with you, and now you think he's not funny anymore because the people he's making fun of are people who are like on your side, which shows that you never valued the comedy in the first place. You just liked the fact that someone was like, you know, laughing and making fun at people you disagree with. Or I remember one time he mentioned that his wife was dismissive about Game of Thrones.
My wife is African American, and she goes, Bill, I don't care about white people in the Middle Ages.
And there was a comment like, oh man, Bill Burr's wife seems like the kind of person that Bill Burr would hate. And it's like, what do you mean? Bill Burr's like an irreverent person who makes fun of things and dismisses things. Why would he hate somebody who has the exact same attitude he has? But for them, it's like, oh no, because she said something about white people, and that's bad because that's on the wrong side of the culture war issue around race. So that means that it's not funny anymore because comedy is just supposed to be about people agreeing with me about the thing that I'm angry about, and that's what funny is. And this film is absolutely mired in the myriad political grievances of the conservative right, and it is tiring. I'm just going to solidly play a series of jokes interspersed with some of my live reactions.
It's racism, Rob. You can't tell a bunch of teenage boys not to steal.
Yes.
This is the fourth time.
For crying out loud.
It's like a mask thing. Okay.
Our history teacher led us in a moment of silence for all the workers exploited by the capitalistic system.
Now they got like a communism thing. I swear, I literally let it play for like 10 seconds. Oh, God. Fuck, there's a joke here. Should we read this joke? In this house we believe crickets are delicious, silence is violence, speech is also violence, no one is illegal, but Europeans coming to America is bad, guns don't kill people, white people kill people, also guns kill people, trans rights are human rights, feelings don't care about your facts, Pride Month is every month, social credit scores matter, inexclusive inclusion, the earth is literally going to burst into flame any day. Good one. Okay, great. Funny.
Physical fitness, bug-based foods, mRNA vaccines.
He did like a joke about eating the bugs. We're not 15 minutes through the movie.
I hear Disney's gonna make the new Snow White a neurodivergent lesbian.
Neurodivergent black.
Just how much everything is, how much just the constant just politics barrage of, hey, conservatives, remember to be offended at how horrible the world is and everyone hates you and victim.
Oh my crap, I teased an ally.
Now, did that feel like an unrelenting onslaught of just bullshit? Because here's the thing, all of that there was from like a 10-minute span of the movie's runtime. That's what it's like watching this movie. It's just, masks are bullshit, school is communist, Hollywood is woke, blah, 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 just so much. And the thing is, a lot of this stuff just isn't jokes. It's functionally the same as just being sat across from Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh and having them complain at you about the things they're angry about. And even the times when it is kind of like a joke functionally, it doesn't feel like there is actually a spirit of enjoying the comedy motivating the writing. It feels like it's just a obsessive desire to own the libs. Like, for example, take this joke from comedian Stuart Lee.
And I say we need to ensure the brightest and best Anglo-Saxons stay in 5th century northern continental Europe instead of coming over here to the UK and laying down the basis of our entire future language and culture. And their astrological stone circle temples with all the rocks aligned with the movements of the planets. What's wrong with just worshipping a tree? And before them, 400 million years ago, when the first fish crawled up onto the land, our land.
Now, whatever your opinion on immigration, this joke is funny. It's taking the anti-immigration stance to an absurd extreme and encapsulating that absurdity in referring to land that existed 400 million years before humans even evolved as our land.
You get back in the sea. You finned cunt.
And significantly, while Stuart Lee is probably motivated to make fun of the anti-immigration argument, it's also pretty obvious that he is motivated by the comedy itself. When I first saw a trailer for this movie, it described it as a triggering comedy.
The most triggering comedy of the year.
And that immediately told me this movie was going to be bad, because it's not a good sign when you're marketing a movie by the reaction it will get from people who don't like it. Because that's what triggering is nowadays. It's getting an extreme emotional reaction from people who are offended by what you're communicating. And I can't help but think, couldn't conservatives aspire to make comedy and media and art where actually they can celebrate the reactions of people who like it instead of just obsessing about the people who don't like it and hate it? Wouldn't that be better? Also, at some point they just completely drop the pretense for comedy. I think it's kind of hard to tell when the movie's trying to be funny and when it isn't, but they have this one character, the female reporter, go on a completely out of character rant about how marriage is really important and divorce is bad.
Of course your divorce is affecting your daughter. 70% of all people in prison come from broken families. She's twice as likely to do drugs, twice as likely to drop out of school, 4 times...
Oh god.
Nihilist college professors have already convinced every self-righteous housewife with Munchausen by proxy to sacrifice their kids on the altar of false virtue.
Like the dialogue, man. For context, this character is presented as cynical and devoid of any values, and there is no character arc where any of this actually changes. This is just said seemingly for no other reason, definitely not for any character reason, just because the Daily Wire wants you to know that marriage is good and divorce is bad. And the thing is, obviously, Ben Shapiro is bothered by the fact that Hollywood tends to be quite liberal in their presentation and their values, but there's nothing like this coming out of Hollywood. There's no liberal equivalent to a movie like this. I mean, obviously there was the Barbie movie, which had some pretty on-the-nose messaging, but that was, first of all, kind of self-aware, and second of all, it was about feminism, and it was just one movie specifically about feminism among loads of movies Hollywood produces. Meanwhile, the Daily Wire have only produced a handful of movies, and as far as I can tell, every single one of them is comparably on the nose to this movie when it comes to just shoving their politics down your throat. And it seems like they just have no chill, no sense of subtlety. They could have made a movie where the jokes are pretty good and the comedy stands on its own, and you also have a plot where there are characters who are motivated for reasons that you can understand and relate to, and then the trans sports stuff is the only level of social commentary that's just kind of on top of all of that as an extra thing to pick up. But instead, you're left watching a movie that has no real good jokes, no plot, and every 5 minutes you'll have a character say some completely out of character dialogue that sole purpose is just to let you know that conservatives are great and liberals are stupid. There's even a random scene where the movie just goes after women.
Women are just like men, only better. Just shave your legs, tell each other how brave you are for things that require absolutely no physical courage, and don't be afraid to cry at work.
And this could be seen as like a, gentle ribbing where women are just supposed to be able to laugh at themselves, but it's a bit hard to interpret it that way when most of the rest of the way that the comedy is presented here is very antagonistic and clearly has nothing but disdain to the targets of the comedy's lampooning. Also, at one point the movie does just try to make some sincere comments about how traditional femininity is good.
Get better at communicating and building community, and they civilize men.
Now, I can't really be bothered with that. I know Helen Joyce has already pointed out that people like Matt Walsh are part of the problem, those who push this idea of traditional femininity as a good thing, and that is what makes women want to identify as men in the first place, when the vision of womanhood presented to them is being nurturing to the kinds of men who will then go on to make movies like this, complaining about them. So yeah, I don't think the conservative politics in this movie do the comedy very many favors.
Okay, boomer.
I know, I liked okay boomer. There we go, good joke. The film also has some sort of raunchy sex jokes.
That's the biggest dick I've ever seen on a lady.
Like, suddenly, in that moment, I'm realizing, of course, the wonderful reality that there is functionally no real difference between, you know, like the bad acting you're likely to see in a bad comedy and the bad acting you're likely to see in, let's call it, adult entertainment. A lot of this is centered around the female reporter character, who I guess is there to be salacious for the enjoyment of men, and then occasionally lecture them on the importance of being committed to their marriage. Talk about mixed signals.
Now put your tongue down my throat.
What the hell was that?
Oh, yeah.
Why do we always seem like just one transition away from some kind of weird sex dungeon at every single moment? Probably the moment in the film that caught me the most off guard was, well, I'll just let my live reaction speak for itself.
Same mom, same time, different dance.
Sounds hot.
That's funny. It's a weird situation where conservatives decided that, like, being easily offended is a liberal thing and conservatives don't get offended, because I guess that then creates the situation where conservatives, if they're going to be consistent, have to have their comedy be, like, very offensive, to be like, hey, look, we're not like the liberals, which I guess means that their comedy consists of, like, jokes about, like, double vaginal penetration. Overall, I'm not going to clutch my pearls too much about the sex jokes. I don't find them insanely offensive. I just don't find them that funny either. One area where the film does a pretty good job is absurdist and shock humor.
What was that badger humping?
I guess, like, so far my main takeaway is that the only times I've really laughed have just been at absurd moments. This admittedly isn't that impressive, since this type of humor is quite easy to do passably. In the moment where they find out that the plan is for them to pretend to be women, they all do these over-the-top reactions, and I thought that was pretty good physical comedy. Again, I don't think this type of comedy is particularly impressive unless it's done in a unique or interesting way, but it still did sometimes get a laugh out of me.
First ever U.S. Open for the Global Games. A big day for sports, and a big day for trans...
I don't want to go on the record saying that the best part of this movie was when Michael Knowles dressed up as a Native American, but, you know, we're almost at the end, and yeah, kind of that. Yeah, this is the best part. It's only just downhill from here. There's also one random moment of pure slapstick that comes out of nowhere. Anyway, let's break from the negativity and point out one joke that I actually liked.
What about people who say that women could never compete in men's sports?
Well, that's a lie. Caitlyn Jenner won the men's decathlon in 1976.
I'm not going to explain what makes this joke good, but I think it's decidedly the only joke that is cleverly constructed in terms of setup and payoff. There's also a pretty good moment of subversive comedy. Towards the end, they decide to actually have a group of girls play instead of them, and the other team, and this is the team that's also made up of men pretending to be women, start helping the girls, you know, score baskets and things like that, and it's a genuinely kind of cute, heartwarming moment. And then this moment is subverted in quite a funny way.
Though ultimately the little girls were trounced. Final score 418-6.
It's a pretty rudimentary subversion, but I'm being generous, so let's count it as a win for the comedy. Something else that definitely got a reaction from me were the various cameos in this film.
Those aren't
what?
I clapped. It's Ben Shapiro. Great. Love that. Classic. Even though some of the cameos did just confuse me.
Are these seats open? Never.
Ted Cruz? What? Isn't Ted Cruz, like, quite significantly disliked even by conservatives? One moment I'll give some unadulterated credit to is when this one character basically plays a parody of Dylan Mulvaney.
Day one of being a girl athlete, I've already eaten a whole pint of pistachio ice cream, given up on parallel parking twice.
A lot of the cameos and references are basically just like Family Guy level comedy where there's not much to the joke except, hey, I recognize that. The Dylan Mulvaney parody actually required some comedic acting, and I would say that the actor here, Tyler Fisher, is probably the only actor who has genuine talent.
I was just invited to the White House to give a talk on women's rights.
You earned that.
You own it.
Slay, girl.
Although, speaking of the references, there were some that I just didn't understand at all.
Nah, he's dead. Found him in the middle of the street with a hole through the top of his head. Cops said it was almost like some type of laser from space, and it was all over the news. Weird. What? Yeah.
What's that joke? I'm gonna go back. I literally have no idea what that joke was.
Welcome to Epstein's Island. You know too much.
What about Epstein's Island? Presumably there's supposed to be a reference to something that some people would find really funny, but whatever the reference for these jokes are is entirely beyond me. And finally, this film at one point went beyond referencing by stealing, shamelessly, from one of the greatest comedy films of all time.
Well, Coach, now that we're basically co-dads...
See, I don't like co-dads because that's from one of my favorite movies of all time, Daddy's Home 2.
You two are such wonderful, progressive co-dads.
Co-dads?
Yeah.
This movie wouldn't be Daddy's Home 2 even on its best day. Before I conclude, I do just want to point out that this was a very clever choice in terms of aspects of trans ideology to lampoon, because there are people I know who really don't agree with me taking the stance I do against trans ideology, but they will almost without exception say, however, I do agree with you about trans sports. Obviously, biological males competing in the women's categories is nonsense. So well done, Daily Wire. You really picked your battles well by choosing that specific aspect to lampoon, just like the characters in this movie picked their battles well by deciding to compete in the Women's League. However, there is an argument that this movie is actually a bit of a self-own, because the tweeter Ari Drennan tweeted out a clip of Ben Shapiro in an interview saying that originally the plan was for this movie to be a documentary, but they realized that this wouldn't actually work because in reality, sporting organizations don't just allow somebody to identify as a woman and suddenly be able to compete in all of the women's categories.
Now, to be fair, I think I'd actually suggested to the Crane Boys that they do this as a doc.
Yes.
I originally went to them and I said, you guys should go try out for a bunch of ladies' leagues. And that became not possible because, as it turns out, most ladies' leagues don't allow in actual men.
So is this Ben Shapiro admitting that the entire premise of this movie is wrong and the movie didn't actually make a point? No. I read this movie as pointing out an inconsistency in the way we deal with trans identity. We say that women's sport should include trans women, and we also say that anybody can be a trans woman if they identify as a woman and they don't have to have any surgery or anything like that because that's transmedicalism and that's regressive. But if you combine those two things together, then logically, it should be the case that if I identified as a woman, should be able to compete against women in women's sporting competitions. The fact that in reality I can't do that doesn't prove that Ben Shapiro or I are wrong about our concerns. It just shows that the current way that sports is being managed is inconsistent. And at some point, it is actually going to have to become consistent, either by saying that so-called trans women can't compete in women's categories at all, or by saying that anyone who is a trans woman, therefore anyone who identifies as a woman, can compete in a women's category, regardless of any kind of surgery or lack thereof. That Ben Shapiro was not able to make this a documentary and had to basically create a film that was a work of fiction shows nothing other than that the establishment that is pushing gender identity can't actually commit to the implications of their own beliefs. Right, that's it. We're done. We did it. We finished the video. So that's the end of the video. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, all of that stuff. And of course, subscribe to my film review channel if you would like to see more of this kind of content from me. Goodbye. Oh, look at this light. This is professional. Let's Let's watch that. Holy wow! This is what happens in winter, right? You just get, oh my lord, I'm angelic. Oof.